Yeah. Well, good morning. We will welcome everyone to our consent agenda meeting, and we will have a workshop following with, again, a robust workshop schedule. We're going to have to throw in more workshops, Bob. If we keep packing these workshops in like this, we'll have a full day of workshops, but it'll be good. So we'll call the meeting to order. The first item is to approve the minutes of the March 15th, 2019 regular meeting minutes and the March 19th meeting minutes. Are there any changes or corrections needed? Move that we approve those meeting minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. On the consent agenda items 1 through 15, are there any items that need to be pulled for clarification or discussion? Seeing none, I would move that we approve consent agenda items 1 through 15.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Board of Bids and Contracts. We have a presentation? Maybe? Thinking about it? She's going to make her way up? No hurry.
Someone's frisky today.
Well, good morning, Mr. Mayor, City Council members. Hannah Lang, Department of Finance. I'm here to present the formal bid report from the March 25th Board of Bids meeting. First bid we have is downtown fiber and signalization upgrade. Recommendation is to defer to April 1st, 2019 meeting. Next engineering bid we have is Barefoot Bay channel realigned sanitary sewer repair. Recommended award is Nice Construction for $343,760. Next engineering bid we have is sanitary sewer to serve McWest Edition. Recommended award is Nowak Construction for $47,010. First purchasing bid we have is foam tender truck. Recommended award is Ed M. Feld Equipment Company for $449,342. Next purchasing bid we have is chemical rehabilitation of wells. Recommended award is Lane Christensen Company for a base bid of $468,000, with options 1 through 14. Next purchasing bid we have is hazardous material vehicle. Recommended award is Conrad Fire Equipment Company for $950,794.94. That's all the bids. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? I move that we award the bids as presented.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Council member appointments.
For District 2, for my District Advisory Board, Alicia Sanchez, and for the Wichita-Sedgwick County Access Advisory Board, Chris Ray, and I've given the information to the clerk.
Very good. Any other appointments, comments today?
No, Mayor, but just for staffs to hold them at ease, I'll be making all my appointments next week at the very last minute.
There is no last minute.
Yes, there is.
If there's no other appointments or comments, we will suspend the rest of the council meeting because we will have an executive session following our workshop. And so we will move into our many workshop items. So I'll turn it over to you, Robert.
Thank you, Mayor. We do have a number of items. First two have actually been instigated by residents and advisory groups to the mayor and council. First one comes from the Arts Council and has to do with a public art plan. And I'm going to turn it over to John D'Angelo to go through the details.
Okay, Mayor and Council. First of all, I'd like to thank Patricia McDonald, and she had convened a group of us to talk about public art and how we might move forward with a public art plan and looking at a public art ordinance. We've provided you a draft. That ordinance continues to be a work in progress. Working with our budget department, we'll still make some edits to that, and certainly before we present it to you, get it back to you. But for today's purposes, what we want to do is share with you the concept so that you can see what we've been working on, and then we'll bring back the details in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Stevenson to start this off, and we'll kind of share the presentation with you.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having me up here today. This is something about which I'm very, very passionate, so I look forward to regaling you with no more than 15 minutes of time on the subject. So first of all, my colleague Arlen will be moving the slides because, again, I can pontificate at great length about any of this stuff, so I'm going to try to keep track of this. I wrote a few notes in my sketchbook, which actually, incidentally, I just thought of this. This is a billboard sign that we designed that's on the side of our building that has now been made into a piece of art. So it's public art that is made art, that is making art. That's interesting. Just thinking out loud here. So we started off, I think we should start off talking about what public art is, because I mean, we are a society, and public art is interesting because it's about the society. It's not just about the individual artist, it's about our history and about the things that we're passionate about, the things that we value, the way we want to be perceived, the way that we are conscious of being perceived. And public artists are actually telling stories. This is the way I look at it. Like, we're telling stories of our society and our history. And most of the time, actually, Arlen, you can move the slide ahead. most of the time, public art is looked at from an economic prosperity perspective, which I totally agree with. I think that's a wonderful place to consider it initially, because we are bringing people together in a way that is meaningful in society. So we're making people want to be in a city, presumably. And I think a great piece of art that we have in Wichita, actually, I'm going to talk about my favorite Wichita projects, because I think we can all respond to those, or we've, at least some of them, I hope, is the troll. And actually, Connie Arnett is in the audience right now. She created this troll that is, it's not necessarily an economic prosperity generator, but it makes Wichita interesting. It is unique. And I don't know how many of you have gone, I'm not going to tell you where it is, because it's best discovered by surprise, but it is somewhere by the river. And I run down there all the time myself, and I'm constantly surprised by this troll. And I always get a shock every time. And this is not something that other cities have. This is strictly Wichitan, and it's not necessarily speaking in a larger context, although I'm sure Connie had lots of ideas when she was constructing it, but it's definitely something that makes people want, I mean, that type of work is something that makes us unique and makes people want to live here and want to relocate here. So the next slide, we're just talking about thinking about other people and getting an eye into their worlds, perhaps, you know, sort of manifesting this cultural understanding that is, you know, perhaps we're at a time in our history where we need to be very conscious of understanding other people's identity and what they value and how to make them feel valued. And I think that, I mean, there are a lot of really beautiful pieces here. I think Ella Bacchus is doing, you know, something along the 9th Street corridor in Brandon Johnson's district, and it is a really beautiful way of valuing the district that she's in and offering the rest of the community sort of an eye into that world and a way of thinking about the residents of that community in perhaps a fashion that they had not yet. And for me specifically, I don't live in that neighborhood, so I haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about it, but Ella's work is very powerful. Next slide. Yeah, and this is kind of along the same lines. I mean, we need to sort of reinforce this social connectivity, as the slide says, and I think also we've really kind of lost a little bit. Well, we're not losing, but as sort of the public art waxes and wanes, you know, the money that we're spending on public art may be a lot in some times and may sort of taper away in other times. And I think it's important to continue to reinforce this, to use public art to make our community strong, or to allow people to sort of rally around a certain idea and discuss it, have something to talk about it, have something that reflects them, have something that they can learn about. And I think that, I mean, we have some great, Riverside Park, I think, is a great example of that. Everybody loves parks, everybody hangs out in parks, our park system is beautiful, and Tina Morano and Steve Murillo have done some beautiful work in Riverside Park, and I think that really draws people together. I think their pieces have created a great opportunity for social connectivity. And then public art can be all about, I mean, not all about, but it can also discuss things like personal health and safety. And I think a lot of people, and mental health, I think a lot of people need to feel, they would like to feel safe in their communities. They would like to feel as though they're part of a tribe, perhaps. Like everybody wants to feel some sort of unconditional acceptance and home. They want to feel like they're home. And I think a big part of that is clearly safety. And there are a lot of specific examples in other cities of where public art has done a great job in creating a sense of well-being, personal or mental and physical safety for people. I think in Boston, I'm just going to talk about Boston briefly because they did an awesome job in the underground ink block. They took an extraordinarily underserved part of the community, and there was a ton of violence, and it was unpoliceable. They were absolutely, even though they placed police there like all the time, there were 3, I think, officers who were responsible for that beat. There were constantly just a lot of really unmanageable violence. And so their solution is to create essentially an underground park where they hired artists to do murals, and they've got coffee shops down there now, and they have dance parties every now and then. And they've actually not only taken the necessity of policing away from the project, but it is now a community centerpiece, and people travel to Boston to go to the underground art block. So I feel like that's something, we don't really have a place in our city that has been suffering that dramatically from violence, but I mean, like Todd Whipple's murals under the train trestle on 2nd Street, like those those are, I mean, there's not, violence issues, at least I've never had an issue under the train trestle, but I feel like people really respond well to a community or to a situation where the community cares. Like they've shown, we care about your safety, we care about making this a space where people are less apt to do something inappropriate. And public art is important from an artist perspective as well, and this is something that I feel very strongly about. I think the arts last year brought in $760 billion to the American economy, which I thought it was in the 400s. Anything with a B in it is a lot, but it's more than twice, or well, almost more than twice what I thought it was. And I noticed that even in Wichita. I mean, I'm with Fish House, and we are part of the Commerce Street Art District crawl at the end of every month. And I think I read somewhere that when people come to the Commerce Street Art District, they spend $24 on average in restaurants or going out for drinks or whatever. I mean, they don't necessarily buy work from us because we made a choice to be more of an exhibition gallery rather than sales gallery, but that's a moot point. But I mean, the point is that they are consuming not only the artwork, but they are actually coming out and having somewhat a $50 a night, which seems to be a commitment. Every time they come down to Commerce Street, they're spending $50, which is not insignificant. And then I'll let John talk about, he can talk about these specific sister city or peer city statistics, because this is important. We need to keep up. We definitely need to remain competitive.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. What we wanted to demonstrate, I know a lot of you have had the opportunity to visit other cities through the Chamber's city-to-city leadership. This is just a demonstration of other Percent for Art programs that are in those cities, whether it's Oklahoma, whether it's Des Moines, Boise, and when those programs were established and passed by their city councils and their electeds. When you look at it from a national perspective, there's about 350 public art programs throughout the United States. About 97% of those are hosted under umbrella organizations such as a municipality or through a local art agency, a relationship with a local art agency. Nationally, 283 of the 350 are located within government agencies, so they're again administered through the capital programs using capital funds. They also develop in their community beyond the public art itself. They also are charged with maintaining the public art collection, developing educational programs. I know we've been fortunate with partnerships with WDDC and others to be able to showcase some of the art that we have in our community. And again, it's a way to attract visitors. Visit Wichita will demonstrate that to you as to why you want to come. I think all of you recognize the Keeper of the Plains and what that has done to us as far as, again, giving us that kind of iconic art piece that we gravitate towards. It also creates print resources, it creates websites. It also creates a partnership opportunity with the private sector. Typically, cities that invest in public art will find that the private sector also wants to invest, and they will give you sculptures, and we've had that same here. The Douglas Street sculptures, for example, was a $500,000 donation given from a family because, again, they wanted to reinvest. Methods used for public art programs include commissioning standalone work or integrated work. A lot of times when we use the word public art, people think that's an object or a piece or what's standing alone. It not necessarily. It can also be integrated into design. I think if what you see going on East Kellogg right now, Vicki Scurry is the artist that worked with our designers that create that wonderful patterns that are on our highway that creates a uniqueness that is uniquely Wichita. So when people drive through, they're going, hey, something's different in this community. You see other work as you progress on Kellogg, whether it's Stephen Weitzman's work or others. Dan Geegan was another artist that was used to make that work. It can also be used as far as for purchasing artwork, so you can actually purchase a piece, or placing artists on design teams to influence design beyond just the value added to a project. How do you enhance that project, and how does that artist conversation helps that? Including educational programs, conservation maintenance. Government programs have the largest budget and spend more money on art commission and purchases than the private or nonprofit. However, private nonprofit programs spend more money than government on conservation and artist outreach. And again, when you look nationally, both public or private. It's a combination that cities have used that inspire both the private sector to also make that same investment into their development. I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth.
So yeah, I'll get back a bit more into the storytelling. I think we value a great deal. We value quality of life, and I know we're looking more towards that right now in our own community as both in sort of an economic stimulator as well as a way of keeping people here, reducing brain drain, and drawing more people to Wichita. And I think just slowing down a little is perhaps a little bit part of that. I mean, we're all very, very eager. We've all got phones. We're all super tapped in. We've got commitments. We're all very busy. But sometimes it's nice to just chill out and have a little bit of time, a little bit of mental time. And I think public art is excellent. I mean, the Wham Sculpture Garden is an extraordinary environment. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to walk through there, but it is a mood enhancer, if nothing else, as well as a great jogging path. And I definitely wanted to talk about the Wichita flag. I was hoping to have an opportunity because the Wichita flag is a piece of public art. I mean, it speaks of our history. It talks about the way we're moving into the future. It references cultural icons from our past. It's got symbolism in it that is sort of multicultural, I think, on many different levels. I wish I understood a little bit more what the symbols were, but we have a lot of pride right now, and we definitely need to capitalize on what we've got with the flag. And I know that image is becoming a little bit trite perhaps, or a bit overused, but I feel like it does represent the power of public art. And yeah, this slide speaks, that's a good segue into this slide. I mean, we're trying to understand a vast multitude of cultures right now as we get more and more tapped in. And I think that public art is a great way, Ella's, as I mentioned, her piece is a great way of communicating things in a way that people are perhaps more apt to understand. It's a very accessible, low pressure way of consuming cultural information. And this is a slide about how artists can solve with innovation and originality. And I have to go a little bit nepotistic here and call out Kent Williams, because he designed a beautiful fence, or what am I saying, fence? I've got fences in my mind. A beautiful bridge that goes across from McLean into Riverside Park. And this is a great example of how involving an artist in a project is of paramount importance, because that was literally just going to be an oil pipe across the river. And there was as far as I know, there was no pedestrian access initially planned, but they invited Kent to be part of the discussion from the beginning, which is, I think, a very important thing as I'm discovering the stadium project. And he suggested, why not make it a pedestrian walkway, which is a great way of connecting those communities. I mean, that community was not going to be able to walk to the park without that bridge. And secondly, why not celebrate this ridiculously large oil pipe? I mean, if we had just stuck it across the river, it would have been an eyesore. But Kent's design sort of cushioned it or cradled it in sort of this infrastructure to the side of the walkway. And now we have this beautiful piece of functional infrastructural art. And that's because an artist was involved from the beginning and they solved the problem with originality and innovation. So bravo you. And I think, we have to talk about the airport, of course. Like, our old airport was okay. I mean, it worked. Planes were able to land, clearly, and humans got in them. But people who came to visit us from other cities or other countries were just not. It didn't talk about Wichita. Like, there wasn't a lot of game in the old airport. And now people come in and it's this modern, beautiful airport. It's full of public art. Like, even there's these beautiful details in the walkways and wayfinding systems. And I love the gorgeous diffusers. Instead of just using typical, standard diffusers that are in most conference rooms, like, they have really interesting sort of porthole, like airplane reference diffuser shapes. And so the airport has changed a lot. I think the airport is a wonderful example of how we've integrated public art into a public building. And then, of course, placemaking. Obviously, this Keeper of the Plains talks is a very important piece for the city of Wichita. And without a public art budget, we would definitely not have had the Keeper of the Plains. I believe that was a city-funded, 100% city-funded project. So great segue. So we need some way now we've been spending money on public art for many, many, many years, but at least in the way that I have been integrated into the process, we do not really have a codified system to talk about how the money's spent. There's not a lot of accountability. There's not a lot of participation. Basically, like, the artist is not necessarily part of the process from the beginning. Like, it's just basically a free-for-all. And we've had, I believe the name is administrative recommendations that have directed this or have tried to direct this process in the past, but because they were not an ordinance, it just became more of a set of guidelines, like an opinion of a group of people who said, this is probably how we should manage the situation, but you are still welcome to find loopholes as you like. So I feel like it's important for us to establish guidelines, to talk about numbers, to talk about budgets, certainly, like basically give ourselves, if we're on this huge piece of pavement, give ourselves a line down the middle so we know how we're going to organize things, and guardrails at the side to keep us accountable, to make sure we're not spending too much, which I doubt we'd ever spend too much, but in my opinion. But I do think that, we need some way of making this process a little more clear to all members of the process, to all members of the community. You know, City Council needs to be able to see every proposal that comes through. The Design Council's recommendations need to somehow make it through staff up to the city. So that's what our ordinance is doing, and we're mandating the 1% of the capital improvement budget for that. Does anybody have any questions?
Questions? Comments? Yeah.
Thank you. I do have two questions, actually. So I've heard from several folks, and I just would like to see what you would say to this. So one, that if artists are involved from the beginning of a project, it makes it too costly and it slows the project down too much. What would you say to that?
Well, that is very true. And I feel like that's an important part of this whole equation, because like right now I'm working on the stadium. I'm our consultant for the new baseball stadium. And I understand that is an extraordinarily accelerated timeline, and it's a design build, so the whole process is a little bit problematic from the beginning, but it's almost too late now. For example, if we're looking at foundations for fixtures such as like a tensile shade structure, those foundations need to be specifically designed because they have unusual loads on them because of wind and all this stuff. So if we're going to put in this object somewhere down the road, those foundations need to have been designed a month ago. Like, they need to be part of the concrete package, but they are not, because we've not even gotten to the point yet where the shade structures have even been approved, or even if there is a budget for that project anyway. So if we do that, we'll have to go in, cut the concrete, and basically construct an entirely new foundation that could have been programmed in from the beginning.
So really you could save money.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if your desire is to put public art or aesthetic components in these public projects, it does behoove you to start early, so you can solve these problems before they come up.
Awesome. And my second one, so yesterday I was at the Linwood Senior Center, and they wanted me to ask you this question.
Okay.
So as we are struggling a little bit with our budget to keep things funded, so we are trying to fill law enforcement, keep our parks and libraries open, they wanted to know why we should even consider earmarking 1% or so for public art. What would you say to that?
Well, I think that is absolutely, this is a question I've gotten a great deal. And I think, first of all, we need to be clear that there are different budgets for different things, and this is something that I just learned recently. Just because we're spending money on public art does not mean that we're taking a police officer off the beat. So the capital improvement budget, sometimes there is obviously gray area, as I've learned in every city, but for the most part, the capital improvement budget is for capital improvement projects. So we're not, and we're also not earmarking 1%, we're just saying, we're already spending money on public art. We don't know how much we're spending on public art, but it's being spent. So we're just saying, let's just take 1% of the entire capital improvement budget, and we may already be at 1%. We don't know. But let's just make that formal, and then we can go through in the city budget and just mark each project, and the Design Council helps with that. Like the aquatics plan, I think they had recommended 10%. But that's, this is negotiable, but that way they'd have that number in there, and then we could start sort of juggling the budget around and making it all work, essentially. So we're not taking money that's being spent elsewhere and putting it here. We're just taking money that's already being spent and finding a way to codify it and make everybody accountable.
Awesome. Thank you.
Other questions?
I've got a couple questions. First, Bob, could you clarify that with, there's different budgets and there's different allocations. Don't we do a lot of shifting around with our budget? I mean, can you truly say that this would no way take away from a firefighter or a police officer? Or?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, it's a good question. It depends, again, on the funding source, but the council has treated the capital improvement program and the operating budget in a more you've handled it in a more coordinated way in the last few years. And so if it's a project that's funded through property tax, it's possible that that property tax could have been used in the operating budget instead of the capital improvement program. If that's the question you're asking.
Okay, thanks. A couple other questions. I'm just trying to understand the difference. I see 1% of the total CIP budget, but then in the documents, I see 1% of available eligible projects. So just trying to get clarification on which one it actually is. Because not every project's going to be eligible.
Right, and it won't be a direct 1% on all eligible projects either. That's where the design council comes in. Like the aquatics plan, they recommended 10% for that project. And the stadium might have come in somewhere at 2% or something like that, if that had been part of the plan initially. But essentially, the way the system will work is the design council will get all of the special considerations projects, or they will designate rather special consideration projects, and then just decide, you know, and again, I feel like there's a little bit of gray area too. They'll say 10%, but after that, then we negotiate. Then as the process as the process moves forward, I think those numbers are refined further. But the special considerations projects are the ones that will receive the aesthetic components. And if there's an underground project, for example, that obviously you can't put a piece of art on an underground. Sure. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to let Arlen answer this because he's our accountant.
That is a great question, Vice Mayor, and it's been brought up many times, and the discrepancy that you're seeing there is because there's a mechanism in the proposed ordinance that establishes an allocation for aesthetic considerations or public art, depending on how you want to put it, and that is strictly a device to set a number. It does not go through and cut budgets. It does not get earmarked from property tax or from water or from sewer or anything like that. What we're trying to do is look at what other cities are doing across the nation, and we're seeing that to know where you stand in the competitive environment, you have to come up with a number. A mechanism for that number is just to say, of our CIP, which moves up and down each year as the different funding mechanisms run into it, something that is tagged to that then will slide with the economic realities of the time. That's part of why the CIP is looked at in a 10-year time frame, because we know that these things shift, they change, and we're just trying to put a mechanism in there so we have an allocation, so we have a number to aim for, whereas today you've seen pictures and you've heard stories about things that we're already doing, but we really have no idea of where we've been or where we're going. All this does is establish a number. It does not say that all the city management is going to have to go in and carve 1% away from anything. All it's saying is that across the nation, our peer cities are generally taking a percentage of their CIP, establishing that as a number, and then when you look at that big poofy ball, I've heard it described as, that is the CIP budget, that is a set size for 10 years. But as you decide how to spend those CIP dollars, you give it a push over here, comes out over there. Give it a push here, comes out over there. At the end of the day, one way I like to put it is we have 365 days in the year, and there is construction going on most of those days for the city. However, if we wanted to take a 1% target and we wanted to say, starting in 2020, we're going to take 1% and we're going to put it towards those projects, then what we would do is we would take 3.65 days of that work and we would push it into the next period. We would not be carving from special allocations. We would not have exclusions. We're trying to make it really simple to where the design council, city management, and then ultimately city council knows where they stand, they know what they're doing, and they have a measure.
So how do I respond to a constituent that would say, you're taking 1% of every infrastructure project, every building we do, every pothole we fix, and you're putting it into a slush fund to be able to use for money that's really not allocated for anything. We just kind of want a budget to pull from to beautify some of the projects we're doing.
And I can see how they would see it that way, since most folks don't work in finance. But as you look at the CIP, there is indeed this ball that does retain its size, but that moves. It depends on the community's priorities. And if you want to take a brand new library and you want it just to be concrete walls, and you want it to have no windows, that would be the cheapest way to build a building. But most communities do not want that as part of their community. They want there to be some kind of aesthetic component to it. All this does is lay out a number, give you a target to work towards as to how much is going to go towards aesthetics on these buildings. It's not an actual carve out of 1% from anybody's budget. You're not going to have all of your department managers going through carving out 1%. This is just a mechanism to establish an allocation.
But we have that ability today, so wouldn't this further restrict us and give us more guidelines on how we have to spend the money? I mean, when we, just like the ballpark, just like the library, you know, we've went in and added it to the budget of those actual projects, and we can still do that today. So that's why I feel like it might further restrict us.
Yeah, you can do that today, and part of what we're talking about is finance, and that's why I'm up here behind the counter. But the ordinance, the proposed ordinance, has many mechanisms in there to help streamline what is going on today. So much of it is ad hoc. As Councilman Johnson mentioned, people talking about how it slows the process down. Well, when artists and art consultants are brought in late in the process, then we may end up having to jackhammer out fresh concrete. But if they were brought in at the very beginning, integrated in, and city staff knew what the dollar amount that should be allocated to aesthetic improvements, then all of a sudden you've streamlined. You've given yourself some lane lines to where you can function out in the world, rather than hoping that it all turns out all right. And then you also have the ability then to benchmark yourself against other communities.
Can I add a super
Absolutely.
brief note? I just want to say the stadium did not have money allocated to it for the aesthetic component. So this is the problem. This is where we're finding ourselves in this a bit of a morass right now. Just to be clear about that, there was no money, no city money allocated for aesthetic components.
But we're working it within the budget, correct?
Well, we're trying right now, but it's very difficult because I'm a consultant for the architecture firm too, so I have a perspective on both ends of the stick. And there's no money in the budget for aesthetic components right now because it's design build and because the timeline is accelerated, every millipenny is accounted for in that project right now. So in order to get aesthetic components in at this late date, there's a whole bunch, like a lot of time is being wasted juggling budgets, pulling things out, adding things in. It's a very inefficient process.
I wouldn't call it wasted time when we're trying to incorporate art.
No, I mean the incorporation of art, I'm just saying if we had mandated a specific number for this project initially, we would not have found ourselves in this
I guess
level
my
of
concern
discussion.
on big projects like the ballpark, I would rather work it in on a case-by-case scenario rather than allocating $1.7 million a year to, we can use it here, we can use it there. I'd rather see that built into our design guidelines when we approve those projects.
Yeah, Robert? I've got a couple of things. First of all, I've got some new terms. I didn't know the CIP was a pushy ball, but and a millipenny is a new term for me also. But I want to, if I can go back to the Vice Mayor's question, because this is something that I think has evolved over time as you've been working on the ordinance. If I understand it, it's 1% for capital projects that are paid wholly or part by the city for improvements to or new construction of a building or structure, streetscape, pedestrian mall or plaza, park, trail, or any other project which includes finished space for human occupancy. So it's not the entire CIP. It's not water and sewer projects. It's not street projects. That's I think the way the ordinance has evolved over time.
That's what I was trying to do.
I think when they started, it was much more inclusive than that. But correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I read it now.
Well, there is a slight correction, because the projects that are eligible for special considerations, what we call it now, are indeed the projects that you listed. But in order for us to be able to compare ourselves across cities, to come up with a number, we it is our recommendation that you take the entire CIP squishy ball that has been established by your either ordinance or by regulation to get a number, then hitch our wagon to that number to establish a mechanism so you know how much to spend, you know how much the city is spending, and you can compare directly to other communities. The way we're doing it now, we have no idea how we compare and what we're doing. And I feel like that we need direction, we need some guidelines. It makes it simpler, it makes it easier for design council, it makes it easier for city staff, and it frankly makes it easier for city council because you know where you stand. Right now, you don't know where you stand, but these dollars would not be earmarked. It is simply a mechanism to establish an allocation.
I don't believe that's the way it reads, Arlen, so
Okay.
you may want to work on the language, if that's your intent.
That is the intent, and we'll it is a work in progress.
I'd like, yes, Councilmember Clayton.
Okay, so I have several questions. So I think this is, in concept, a really good idea to codify what we have, what we're doing, but haphazardly right now, I think. So I want you to take my comments and questions in that vein, okay? So I'm trying to figure out this establishing the budget. Would that mean, for example, so I understand establishing a budget based on the total CIP, and so about $1.8 million, I think is, but I know it would vary from year to year. And I'm trying to figure out, does that mean, so for example, with the baseball stadium, so it's a $75 million project right now, we would have, from that, $7.5 million would have been, right, allocated to aesthetics. Maybe not in this particular project, but it would have been added to the aesthetics budget. Is that?
$750,000.
Or 750,000, sorry, have my decimals off, okay. And then, so is that how you're talking about establishing that budget, is that the budget for the stadium would have been 75 million plus an additional 750,000? Is that correct? Or is it included in the 75 million? This is what I'm trying to understand.
Okay. So the stadium is a specific example, and it also fits the group that the city manager listed. So those are all eligible. We don't know, I don't know, I'm an accountant. I don't know how much should go towards the baseball stadium. But we have professionals on the design council that do know. So, but today they don't know what money is available in the CIP for that. So that's why we recommend, and obviously we need to work on the language of the proposed ordinance. What we recommend is taking 1% of the entire CIP without any special allocations, without any kind of exclusions. It just establishes a target. And when design council looks at our baseball stadium and they look at the other special consideration projects, new fire stations, new police stations, new intersections, they know how much can be then allocated to each of those projects. Because I would say we are a city on the move, and we are building a new baseball stadium, and we are garnering national attention. And if we only spend $750,000 on a $75 million baseball stadium, I think we are going to be sorely disappointed with the result, even though I'm not an architect or an engineer.
Okay, let me ask this a different way.
So I believe what they're saying is you establish a 1% art fund, and it will be on top of all projects.
Okay, that's my, all right, that's my
So
question.
all of the 1% art fund,
Would
so
be
whether
on
it's
top of
it. Would be on
a
top.
new parking structure or whether it's streetscape, the 1% allocation that's programmed in then comes out of that allocation and gets added to every project.
Yes, that's correct.
That
Okay.
is-
All
that
right.
is correct.
That was my question, okay.
And the other thing I would say, Councilmember Claycomb, is that historically what we've done is we've not always used 1% as, a project's this much. So in the case of the Douglas and Lewis Street bridges, they were almost 8% of the total budget. But there were several other projects, sorry about that, throughout the year that did not have any art included. So when you look at it from a holistic perspective, the last time we did the study, we were spending about 0.5% overall. And so it's how it's allocated and what funding source it comes from.
Okay. So then I have a question for staff, Bob. Does this work that we just slide our CIP projects 3.65 days and then we can establish this budget? Will that work?
Well, I'm not quite sure about that mechanism, but what they're talking about in terms of the allocation of the dollar amount basically as a CIP project.
Right.
We would simply add a new project to the capital improvement program called Public Art, and it would be established at the 1% level that they are recommending. We've had a number of discussions, and it'll depend on what the final definition looks like. I have on general obligation bond supported projects, that's pretty easy to do, right? It'll be more difficult with if water and sewer projects were included, or definitely difficult if we had a federal or state grant that was paying for a project, or we had federal money.
Okay.
So those are all things we have to work through.
Yeah, because that's my other question is the enterprise funds, like water and
Right.
sewer.
Right.
How do they get handled to make sure, some of the questions that the vice mayor asked
Right.
about?
So but at the same time, you may want to think through that at the time this is adopted, because we will have structures that are above ground that are, vertical structures like a water treatment plant. That you'll want to think through, that there may not be a 1% set aside, but it goes back to what the vice mayor is saying, how much would you put aside for that project?
Okay, all right. And then when I look at the ordinance, and maybe I'm just not reading it correctly, but I don't understand city council's involvement in this. A lot of times the ordinance says the design council will recommend, but it doesn't say who they will recommend to. And so I'm not clear that procedure is laid out like maybe I would like to see it in this ordinance, because that I respect the design council's recommendations, but the electeds are the ones that will be criticized if we don't have some final say in that.
Yeah, part of the input from today, want to thank legal and Sharon Dickgraff's back there. She's been working with us, so yes, we'll make those changes and make sure some clarity is given to that.
Okay, and then I wasn't also sure when, again, reading the proposed ordinance, was what the relationship between the Design Council and the Arts Council was. On page 12, if you want to look at that, there's some relationship shown there, but I didn't understand what the relationship was. It just says that they'll make recommendations to the Arts Council and to the City Council on selection and promotion of public art. But I didn't understand why there was a relationship between Design Council and Arts Council.
The historical relationship between the two entities is to utilize the 501c3 of the Arts Council. So if you have a public project that you're trying to raise funding for, it's a vehicle by which to do that. They share one board member that serves on both boards. But we can also try to bring more clarity to that. And as this moves forward, that relationship may, and the manager and I have had this discussion, that relationship may change a little bit as a result of it.
Okay, all right. And then my last, again, when we're looking at this ordinance, I understand the establishment of the 1%, and then it's not 1% for each project. The way the draft ordinance is written, that's how I interpret it. Now, I may just be interpreting it incorrectly, but as a layperson reading that, it appears to me like it shows 1 for 1, and that's not the intent. So we might look at that again.
Correct. Yeah, we've observed a few changes that have to be made, including, like I shared at the beginning, Finance Department shared some information yesterday that I intend to make sure gets integrated in there. Whether or not the 20%, I mean, it's got to be a bondable expense. You can't just have, so we've got still some work to do on the ordinance itself, and we'll be back to you with it.
Okay. And then one more thing. When we talked about the city-to-city cities, are all of theirs a percent of their capital budget?
Correct. Some exclude, some have exemptions. Des Moines exempts the enterprise funds while others don't.
Okay.
So it just depends on the city. Each has it a little bit unique.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to tree off of what Councilmember Claycomb just said, with Design Council, Arts Council, City Council all being, there are areas where it just refers to council.
Right.
So I think if we clean this up and be very specific about which council we're talking about,
Okay.
will help tremendously. Also, it talks about the Public Art Trust Fund. Who manages that? Is that Design Council or is that staff? Because I'm not clear on it.
In this concept, it would be a city fund. And talking with Mark Manning with Finance, again, we may want to relook at what we qualify that as and just how do we identify it. And so we need to work on that as well. That was one of the other issues that Mark brought up, which I think is really valid. We have to figure out the verbiage
Because it
of
even
this.
takes that 1% and splits it down to
Right.
80% on the art and then 20% on maintenance and even staff.
Correct.
Which I guess that's a new person, or is that
It-
you? Or
Yeah, in concept, you'd want to have a public art manager, and you may, depending on the scope of the number of projects that you're administering. And again, conceptually, if you look at projects of $3 million or less, let's say for the most part, the artist selection will be as part of the architectural selection process. 3 million or more, like the Ball Diamond, you would go out with a separate contract from the city. Well, you want to administer that, and how does that staff get paid? That's what what the other programs use.
Okay, thank you.
So a couple of things that I do like, and we'll have to work out the language. I agree with our city manager's concern that we need to figure out exactly how we're going to attach that 1%, but I like the idea of making the art fund part of the capital improvement plan. And at the end of the day, Arlen, I think you explain it well. I don't know whether it'll be 36 days in 10 years, or depending on how we craft it, depending on, how we attach it to state and federal funding that we get in the CIP and how much we should add to that. I can make the argument that we're getting state and federal help, so maybe we ought to make up a little bit on our own. It might not be 36 days in 10 years. It might end up being 30 days in 10 years. And so we can figure that out and walk through that. And when you put it in that perspective, I don't think we're asking for much. And we will continue to grow that as our city grows. So we'll fit more projects in our capital improvement plan over the next 10 years. A lot of additional projects will be incorporated in there. And so I like the idea of just, because what that also does is it ensures that you're not competing per se with your police and fire budget and some of the other things. We don't consider that competing today with police and fire. And so I think that will help significantly. The other thing that I really like is the fact that we're not asking for a statue to be added at the ballpark and call that art and call it good. I've been out on these discussions as we work our way through the ballpark. We've already had multiple discussions about how do we incorporate art into the design, looking at putting it into the railings that will be set up around the ballpark and incorporating it into the design. And I'll argue we do have shade structures planned at the ballpark. And so we know that we're going to have some significant shade structures, and we've already talked about those shade structures having an aesthetic appeal to them. But what I really like is the fact that we are incorporating art into the design elements, whether it's a roadway, a bridge, a building. I think that's very appealing. Because what I don't want us to fall into is, okay, we've added 1% art, let's just add art onto the end of the project and it's a mural or a statue or something of that type, and we all think that that's great public art. Although it may be, I think it's the wrong way to look at public art. And so I would hope that we will continue to look at ways to integrate that into the functionality of whatever we're building.
And we've,
Yeah.
we've discussed a lot of particulars here today, and we are absolutely open to working with finance, working with the city manager's office. The real key is that we have some kind of a structure or mechanism to where all of us know where we're at, all across the city, but mostly design council, city staff, and the city council. That way you're not being hit with last-minute requests for what I would call plop art.
And I think that's a great way to phrase that, and I totally agree. And we haven't ever codified a fund for integrating art, although we've done an okay job at times of integrating art into the fabric of what we're trying to do in this city. This would certainly codify it and I think improve the way that we do projects over the next 25 years. Councilmember Clendenin?
Mayor, I don't have much to say, but I think there are a couple buzzwords that fly around the political world these days that I think that this is trying to accomplish in part, and that's accountability and transparency. We're trying to make our process here more accountable, not only to artists, but to the public, and be more transparent about how we're spending those funds. Right now, we may be spending 2 or 3%. We don't know. We really don't. I mean, some of these projects, I mean, maybe we're spending
right,
0.5%.
Right. Some projects we spend quite a bit, and some projects we don't spend any. So.
Sure, and we just don't know where we're at. And so I think this even is an accountability and transparency measure for the public. And I think that that's important. And we get to make sure that we're making our city a beautiful, nice place to be at the same time.
Councilmember Tuttle looks like she wants to say something.
Well, I was just going to ask, didn't you say now we're spending 0.5%?
Earlier
Did I hear
study,
that?
this is for a previous council, an earlier study when we did it at that time. This has been several years ago, it was about 0.5. We haven't done that of late. We could certainly look into it.
Sure.
I
We
was
don't
going to say,
have
it would
a
be
number.
interesting to know now how much we're spending, because
Sure.
it could be 2 or 3%,
Robert.
and then we'd be going backwards.
Robert's
Yeah.
our,
And a lot of it would have to do with the year you would pick and what major
Sure.
projects you would have.
Right. From a general obligation bond standpoint, we're about at 1% right now.
so we've been at 1%.
Over what period?
If you look at the last adopted CIP.
Could we look at like the last 5 years to see what we're spending?
Right, we were looking forward, so I could look, yeah. we could
Just
do that.
historically, I'd
Yep.
like to know what we
Yep.
were.
And my only concern about that is if you just say 1% every year, I mean, I love the guidelines and, having more structure, I love that part of it, but we're not going to build a baseball stadium every year. And so maybe one year you want more than 1% because it's a really significant improvement in the community and a significant presence. And so that's the only thing that I'm a little bit worried about, is that the 1% may be too restrictive and might not allow us to take advantage of, once in a 20-year opportunities.
But when you look at our budget, it doesn't fluctuate from a budget perspective too much year to year. We may build one big project, but overall, the mill levy's the mill levy, the budget's the budget, and so it doesn't fluctuate too much. What we spend on art and different projects, as they're sharing, may fluctuate because one project may get 2% and one project may get 0.5%. Kind of depends on the project and all of those details, so. I think we have some, yes.
I just want to clarify that I don't mean we have been spending 2 or 3%, but we don't know, and we could in the future. And so we just need to be transparent and accountable with the public on where that money is going, and I think this is a good mechanism to do that. So.
And I would add, if we find out from Bob that we've been spending 1%, I don't think that's enough, so maybe this should be 2%.
That's what Austin is spending, and I don't know if we want to
Let's
follow in
not
Austin's footsteps.
lose sight
We'll
of
see.
what we're trying to codify here, folks.
Just saying.
Yeah, it's more about the process than the actual.
Mayor, I have just one more kind of comment and question. It seems like right now, I can't tell you that we see every design council recommendation for % for art. Do we, John? Do those come back to us? Those
Yeah, we try to provide the minutes to you within 10 days after the design council meeting. That's how you receive the recommendation.
Right, but we don't see we don't see the project come back and say, so there's been the minutes I understand, but it doesn't formally come back to council now, right, as an agenda item.
Correct.
I believe that the specially designated projects are identified in the capital improvement program, so when we forward it to you, that's included.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel like we could do a better job
Sure.
of that, because I don't think, and I don't mean this as a criticism, I mean this as going forward. This seems to me that we could use this process to better connect to city council to say, okay, here's what design council recommended, or how do we set up this process, and here's what that means. And I think this was a good opportunity to be able to do that.
Certainly, we can add that, and I think that's a great idea. And again, public art connects with communities, and how do you communicate it to the community itself, too? So, absolutely.
Thank you.
You have enough guidance. We're happy to give you more guidance if you need it. All right, thank you all. Robert, you want to?
Mayor, I think you're right, this may be a day-long workshop. The next item is coming to you from the Animal Advisory Board, has to do with a recommended program, trap, neuter, and return. I'm going to have the item introduced by Chet Pinkston from the Police Department, and then the Advisory Board will make the presentation.
So let's just.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, council members, and Mr. Manager for allowing us to be here today. My name is Chester Pinkston. I'm a captain with the Police Department, and I am the administrative consultant for animal services for the Wichita Police Department. We have an advisory board that meets, comes up with ideas and suggestions for us. They're responsible for having the dangerous dog ordinance that was brought before you. And we've had a subcommittee that's worked on a program called Trap, Neuter, Return for the last few years. And this has become the #1 priority for the board. Back in November of 2017, we did a survey of the community, came up with some direction from them. The board has since acted on that, had a sample ordinance brought to them that they worked through and came up with the product that they have to present for you here today. The person that's going to do that presentation for us is Stephanie McCurdy. She is the chair of our board, and I will be up here if there are any questions that come up that need to be answered by the police department as opposed to her. I will stand by to answer those questions after her presentation. Thank you. Stephanie?
Good morning. Normally I get to see you all in a different capacity, so this will be fun today. Good morning, Manager Layton and Mayor Longwell and Council. Thank you for allowing the Animal Services Advisory Board to present today on today's agenda with the Trap, Neuter, Return ordinance. Approximately 6 to 8 million cats and dogs enter U.S. shelters each year, with over half of them being euthanized. That was a statistic that came out in 2013 with the Humane Society of the United States. Cat-related intake and euthanasia activities cost more than $1 billion each year. I'm going to start with a bit of background about what TNR is. TNR is trap, so they would trap the cats, they would neuter and or spay them, and then they would return them to their environment. This is a method of reducing outdoor cats population by capturing them, providing them with the services that they need, including vaccinations, and returning them to their original environment. TNR creates an opportunity to help protect people and animals while reducing conflict between cats and humans, as well as between cats and other animals. Community-wide TNR programs are effective because they halt reproduction of existing cats through sterilization and leading to the long-term management of these colonies and the eventual elimination of outdoor cat populations. They also vaccinate against rabies and other diseases, depending on the resources that are available, and they address the public health concerns and any type of safety risk to humans. They also decrease nuisance complaints, and by eliminating and dramatically reducing noise from cat fighting and mating, and odor from unneutered male cats because of spraying urine to mark their own territories. It also eases the burden on community resources, such as animal shelters that are flooded with cats and their offspring, especially during kitten season, which comes up in the spring, summer, and fall. May, in some instances, create the reduction in cats due to kittens that are young enough that are trapped to be able to be routed into an adoption process. And depending on the shelters that have them and the resources that are available, they can be adopted out. And also, friendly adult cats can be evaluated for potential reunification with any type of a lost owner, or sheltering. The channels can depend on the situation with the resources that are available, and they can have caretakers and feeders with the bonded cats that are already there. Here's a graphic about trap, neuter, and return, and essentially about the process. There are 5 steps to this process. The cats are trapped and are captured. The cats are transported to an area clinic. The cats undergo surgery and their ears are notched for identification purposes. And the cats are given a few days to recover. And then they are returned to their environment. Cats that are unsterilized exhibit unflattering characteristics and risk to humans, as in urine spraying, noise making, and any type of fighting. The goal with TNR is to decrease the number of the population of feral cats. As Captain Pinkston already told you, in 2015, the Animal Advisory Board took a look in developing a standard for the city for TNR. What we realized is that TNR was already happening in our city. However, the city was not playing a role in the TNR process. In December of 2017, we did a community survey. 20% of respondents felt that feral cats were a nuisance in their neighborhood. 64% of the respondents felt that this city should take an active role in assisting neighborhoods with this issue. And 48% felt that the most pressing issue for animal control was to reduce the euthanasia rate in the shelter. So in 2018, in April, a committee presented a possible ordinance to the board. The committee presented this draft, and after multiple meetings and lots of discussion, we come before you today with our draft ordinance. The police department has since then formed an internal committee to review the ordinance and ensure that it is applicable and enforceable for the city of Wichita. The city of Wichita recognizes the need for the innovation in addressing the issues presented by feral and free-roaming cats. To that end, it recognizes that trap, neuter, and return, the program, is a viable option to manage and over time reduce the population of community cats, thus reducing the number of cats that are going to be entering the shelter system and being euthanized. The program relies on volunteer caregivers to trap free-roaming cats, to spay, neuter, and vaccinate, and for rabies, and ear tip for identification, and then return them to the location where the cats were originally trapped, with the property owner's permission, or to an alternate location. I will tell you, as a side note, in another city in Kansas, they did a trap, neuter, return program. However, the homeowner did not want the cats returned to the program. So they had cats that they trapped, they neutered and spayed, and they relocated them to another area of the state Within a year, 2 of the 50 cats had made their way back 3 hours away to the original location. And how they figured that out is they had given them identification purposes. So they do travel back to their own locations. So just some ordinance highlights. The creation of the TNR ordinance is to address, the only thing it's really to address is the overpopulation of cats. It creates a definition of feral and community cats and other specified matters in the term. Feral cat, one that is unsocialized to humans and has a temperament of extreme fear and the resistance to contact with humans. And a community cat means an ear-tipped feral that may be cared for by a designated caregiver in the immediate area. Community cats are not domesticated. There also are caregiver guidelines for feeding, watering, and care. And just to share some statistics with you today, in 2013, the city of Wichita euthanized 2,961 cats, which was 66% of the cats that were brought into the shelter. In 2014, the city of Wichita euthanized 2,353 cats, which was a decrease to 55% of the cats that were brought into the shelter. In 2015, we euthanized 2,118 cats that were brought to the shelter. That's a 46%. In 2016, we euthanized 1,630 cats, to be 43% of cats brought into the shelter. 2017, we euthanized 1,227 cats, which was 31% of the cats brought into the shelter. And in 2018, we only euthanized 920 cats, and that's 25% of the cat population that was brought into the city shelter. You're going to notice that there was a drop in the euthanasia rate. That has to do with a lot of partner rescues with the city of Wichita that are trap, neuter, releasing on their own dime. They're also making sure that these animals get back to where they need to go, and they're being a player partner in this. And also there is a partnership with one of the rescues here in town that the K-State Mobile Vet comes and does this free of charge for this rescue. So it's not just a city of Wichita item, it's a community partnership. Some more ordinance highlights. There's mandated registration of the cat colonies. There's annual reporting requirements for the colonies. And there is applicable enforcement by animal services that is if it's warranted. We've addressed that in 2 areas of the ordinance. Enforcement is warranted under nuisance, which was 6.04.010, that's the definition, and 6.04040, section E12, which specifically talks about cats. Benefits of the ordinance changes: it's a community-centric approach. We have community buy-in, and we've created other funding sources to help with the program. There are 3 large departments that currently do a program like this TNR program. New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, the New York State Department of Health and Senior Services, as well as the Baltimore City Health and Department. There are many other departments that have a similar ordinance for trap, neuter, and release. Those are just 3 of the large ones we chose to talk about today. Cat-related intake and euthanasia activities cost more than $1 billion annually in the United States. It's a haphazard approach that has little impact on welfare, environmental, or public issues with euthanasia. Communities that embrace effective cat management programs, such as TNR, are rewarded with goodwill from their residents. And large-scale sterilization programs depend on volunteer support. Non-lethal management programs will be readily supported by the majority in a community, while lethal control will not receive the same support and may be actively opposed, which we have already experienced here in the city of Wichita. Without TNR, it stresses the shelters, it overwhelms all of the resources that are currently available, and they far exceed the capacity in shelters. And it gives false expectations that coming to an animal shelter will help resolve the problem, as we know that we do have to do euthanasia. The recommendation is to place the ordinance on first reading and authorize necessary signatures, and I will be available for questions.
Questions? Yes, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you for being here. So I've got 3 questions for you. First,
Yes, sir.
will the cats that are trapped and receive services be microchipped to help with tracking and identification?
In the current ordinance, the way it's written, they will not be microchipped.
Okay.
Because microchipping shows that it's an owned cat, and the colony caregivers don't own the cats. They're a community cat.
Could they not be microchipped as a community cat?
They could, however, the increase in the cost is approximately $7.
So the colony owner could pay that, could they not?
They could, yes.
Okay. Second question, will there be any consideration of limits on the cat colonies within a certain radius, so you don't have like 3 on one block?
Oh, 3 cat colonies?
Yeah.
We do not currently have that in the ordinance.
Well, I know a lot of folks that, since this made the news, I've had people reach out and they say, well, 1, I don't want a cat colony next to me.
Mm-hmm.
And 2, I'd hate to have 3 on my block and 30 or 40 cats just running around because someone wanted to take care of them with their, I would like to see some form of restriction on amount of colonies within a radius.
In regards to that, colonies just don't show up on a street. So what we're trying to do today is address the colonies that are already there, bring these people into compliance that are already caregiving for these cats, and to also help sterilize them so they don't create more. So if someone's asking you that they don't want 3 on their street, most likely they already have a colony that's there and they're aware of that. So by sterilizing that colony, it reduces the opportunity for another colony to begin.
Okay. And then is there a limit on the number of cats within a colony?
We do have a number of limits that you would have to, and I'll let Captain Pinkston speak to that, but there are limits that are set forth already by city ordinance.
Okay. Well, my only concern, I guess, is I like this, it's non-lethal, but just from, and I know some of the colonies that were referred to me, I know there's 1 block with 2, and I know those 2 at least have around 20 cats. And some of the neighbors are already upset from the smell, the cats in their yard. They feel like they're chasing off wildlife. And if we just, I understand we're trying to take care of the colonies we have, but if there's nothing to stop new ones that continue to pop up on blocks, I think that could be an issue.
Well, how you stop new ones is you start sterilizing the cats that are already there.
I guess I will just always wonder if we're not tracking how many by, again, requiring that colony person to pay for it. We really won't know a whole lot of the impact. I've had colonies pop up by my house and then they disappear, and then I find out they moved into a sewer drain. There's a neighbor 2 blocks over, I think, that still has one. I'm not sure they're getting those cats neutered, so I'll continue to see new litters of kittens. So again, if we're not tracking that, I don't see how, outside of the ear tip, and we have to be real mindful of looking for that, how we track if we're actually reducing those numbers.
Yeah. I understand your question, and I have the same concern. However, if we don't start somewhere, we can't reduce the cat population for feral cats. And so this is a step in the right direction to bring us into compliance and try to help with that, and then also bring these colony caregivers into compliance as well.
Okay.
So I know we have a, group of dedicated volunteers that make up the board. What was the vote of the board on moving this forward? Was it unanimous? Was it?
It was not unanimous, no.
What was the vote?
It was 4-3.
4-3, and so what was the negative side? Because I would say all 7 care deeply about animals. They certainly wouldn't serve on that board if they didn't. What was the argument on the 3 side that convinced them to vote no?
I believe that we spent a lot of time talking about this. We took a lot of public comment, and I'll be very honest with you, at times it was very volatile. And at some point, you have to start somewhere. You have to have a jumping off point. And I think the 4 members that voted for the TNR ordinance, knowing that it would go out to the district advisory boards, it would come to council, we would seek more legal from the city of Wichita, that would bring a better ordinance together, but we were at a standstill. We had factors that, just like you said, like with the microchipping, we had some people that were dead set on microchipping. It's just not feasible. I mean, it's just not in the budget for that. But you have to start somewhere, and you can't reduce a cat population without starting with sterilization.
So
it's the number one factor.
The no side of that equation was mainly just microchipping? What was the?
We had microchipping that was talked about, as well as wildlife conservation that was talked about. But we do know that cats can travel over 2 miles in a day. So no matter how you make a circle around a city park or a circle around a specific evidence, you can't guarantee that a cat from 2 miles away isn't going to travel to that area either. So.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Stephanie, thanks for being here. I don't know if you can answer this or if Captain Pinkston can. What kind of numbers are we looking at annually, and what kind of cost are we looking at per cat? And then I'd like to compare that versus the euthanasia as well.
Okay.
First off, Mayor, just also to answer part of your question, another big concern was there were at least one of those 3 members that voted no wasn't satisfied that we had strong enough caregiver guidelines. That's what's been expressed to me in conversations and meetings after the ordinance was pushed forward by the board. To answer your question, Vice Mayor, if you're talking about what does it cost us, for the drugs, to euthanize a cat, it's actually a very small cost, probably under $1. If you're talking about the amount of time that we spend having to deal with cats who continue to come into our shelter, because it never stops. It's going to be $1 into perpetuity. We also have to account for the staff's time in dealing with these animals, the one who's doing the procedure. We then have to store these animals until we have a large enough group of animals that we put into our incinerators and operate those. So we have this continuous ongoing cost that's never going to stop. If you look at what does it cost on the front end of TNR, I would say it's probably going to be more expensive. What kind of helped convince me that this is a good approach was when we started looking at the community partners being more successful, because as Stephanie alluded to, when you look at our euthanasia rates, it's not that Wichita Animal Shelter is doing a great job. It's because of our community partners, our rescue partners are helping us with that issue. So if you look at what TNR is going to cost on the front end, the city, I don't know, is going to have a direct significant cost on the front end. I think that's going to be borne by the community partners. That's what, to me, makes this something that's palatable for us to go forward, because there's no initial necessary increase on the part of the city. But if you talk about what does it cost us to euthanize, it's a continuous ongoing cost that never goes away.
So what kind of if council passed this as an ordinance, what kind of forecast would use? I mean, that's just what I'm trying to understand. In a year, how many cats would you expect to put through the program, and what cost would that be potentially?
Well, right now, our community partners are doing this and putting quite a few cats through the process right now. I don't have a specific number to give you, so it'd be just simply a guess, and I think that would be a disservice to your question, so I don't want to do that. What we're looking at is to increase the efforts that we have to go out and provide education to some of these caregivers, to find ways to help resolve some of the nuisance problems, because we get that people don't want to have 3 cat colonies on their block. Okay, if what we've done so far, which is basically just euthanize cats as they come in and we can't adopt out, we still have cats coming in all the time. Okay, cats will have 2 to 3 litters each and every year. And if we don't do something to stop this on the front end, then we're going to have this same problem that we have today. We've seen success in some of the other communities. 2 weeks ago, we went to Lawrence, Kansas, and to Salina, Kansas, to talk to them and see what they're doing and how successful it is. And they are having success. We went to North Newton last year. They're having success with this program. We're looking at Baltimore to see, how they've done operations with their shelter itself, and they have a similar program. So we're looking at options. I would tell you that one of the concerns I had when the board brought forth their ordinance was the enforceability side. We want to make sure that there's some way we still can stop the nuisance problems if they crop up. So we're looking at, I think, a well-rounded approach. We're asking for the community be the direct initial problem solver on this with the city as a partner.
So if I'm hearing you right, are you saying you think volunteers are going to step up and help with a lot of this?
They already are, and I do believe we'll see an increase.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions? Yes.
So I think there was a question asked earlier, and I didn't catch the answer to it. Does the ordinance limit the number of cats within the colony?
So
To
there's already an ordinance
Oh, that limits that?
that limits that. Currently, you have to get an A&P license to apply. Your neighbors are alerted and things like that. So there's already that's in place.
And how many is that?
Maximum.
Right now, Cindy, currently you can have 2 cats inside. You can apply basically for a variance to go up to 4. The cats that we're talking about are not indoor cats. These are not your cat and my cat that sit on our lap while we're watching TV in the living room. These are outdoor cats. Okay, some of them are slightly less afraid of humans. Typically, their caregiver, the person that feeds them, they're willing to allow that person to get close to them. And then truly feral cats, which are not. Okay, so we're not talking about cats that people are getting variances for.
Right.
These cat colonies exist in our community. The Friends of Feline is probably the biggest one that I'm aware of that constantly goes out literally on a daily basis and tries to help with these colonies. The ordinance as it's written and presented has a cap of 8 cats for these outside cats.
Okay. And did you say that you thought TNR will be more expensive to the city than our current practice? No. Okay. It should be
We believe that
neutral?
We believe that the only way this is going to be successful is the community continues to partner with us. The community, it's my understanding, if we have an ordinance for this, it helps those community partners go out and seek grants and donations to help with these costs.
Okay.
And part of that is going to be what our wording and stuff says in our TNR ordinance.
Okay. And so who will pay for the partners pay for neuter, spading, vaccination, education?
Yeah, they're currently already bearing the expense.
Okay.
But with an ordinance of this magnitude, they're able to apply for additional funds and larger grant purposes where the city would not be able to, and that would also pay for that. So the likelihood of them being able to trap, neuter, and retrain more cats in a year is
Than they
highly
can
likely.
now. Okay. And then what's the recommendation on what the cats will be vaccinated against? I suspect rabies, but is that all?
Yeah, they would get a rabies.
Just rabies?
Mhm.
Okay. Are there any limits in the proposed ordinance on the proximity to wildlife habitats? I know that was a discussion at your meetings.
There is not currently anything addressed about wildlife in the
Okay.
ordinance.
And are local veterinarians part of the partnership? I mean, are they?
So the K-State Mobile Unit comes and they're here almost every single month doing, they're doing over 100 cats a month, as well as there are other organizations. I know of one that did one last month, and they did 120 cats in 2 days, and that was a partnership with KHS, and KHS is also doing similar outreach programs currently for trap, neuter, release.
So is that what we rely on, are those kinds of things as
We
opposed to
rely on those
local?
partnerships to actually facilitate the process.
So if somebody had a colony and they wanted to have it trap, neuter, returned, and there wasn't one of these mobile labs coming soon, how are those handled?
So typically the mobile lab would come whenever we know that there is multiple areas that need to be taken care of, as well as the spay and neuter days, which some area partners already currently do, like the one last month. It's first come and first served. So they would just they would have to trap the animal and bring them in. A lot of times, whenever you're working with a community partner, they're taking that process completely over for that caregiver.
Okay.
So they're actually coming out, helping set the traps, they're actually working on the transport, they're doing the spay and neuter services, and then they're helping return them to the original habitat.
So they only just do it kind of on a scheduled basis.
Right, and if there's a severe situation, which we've had, whenever calls come into animal control goes out, and they find that there is a large colony that needs, obviously, immediate attention, they jump right on it, and they'll get that taken care of as well.
And then this is just a question that I've been asked by community members. There is the sense that the Animal Advisory Board was biased towards TNR and didn't look at other options. Can you address that, Stephanie?
I'm not sure what other options of sterilization would be available for this type of a project.
Well, so one thing that's been, I'm not advocating this, just
Right.
from a community member, is leash laws, looking at leash laws like we do every other type of animal. There's that.
Okay.
I know that's kind of extreme, but.
So leash laws would really tailor towards owned cats, and these are not owned cats. And a feral cat is a cat that you can't have contact with. So it's very rare for someone that's dealing with a feral cat to be able to walk up and to even touch it. You'll lose your fingers, most likely, or get severely scratched.
Yeah, okay, all right. So I guess what you're saying is the committee didn't think there were other options to look at.
Right, and we did talk about them during the process. Unfortunately, they're just not viable options for something that's so large.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
Just a quick question. You said you went to other communities and they were successful. What does success look like? It's less cats, but how do you monitor that? I mean, at the end of or is there a benchmark of you want to have blank % less, or how will you know if it's working?
So, actually, I asked, give me 1 second here. I spoke with Friends of Felines, and they're the largest contributor right now to TNR here in the city of Wichita and the surrounding communities. They actually started getting really heavy into TNR in 2015, and they TNR'd 662 cats in 1 year. In 2016, they did 906, and that's whenever the rollover came with the K-State mobile unit. And then in 2017, they did 908 sterilizations of cats. And then last year, they did 1,017, and as of today, there are around 315 that they've already started. So seeing the numbers of the cat euthanasia going down in the shelter, with trap neuter release already being available for them, and then also rescue partners being able to take the cats and find viable homes for them has also been a huge factor. So seeing the decrease in euthanasia go down since 2013 it's a pretty successful increase.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, we're saying per ordinance that somebody can have 4 indoor cats plus 8 outdoor cats if they're properly licensed. So that would be 12 total cats on premises?
Yeah, Councilmember, in theory, that is correct, but to get to 4 cats indoor, they have to have the variance. It would have to be on file, but generically, they could have 2 without, a variance, and then the 8 outside cats that they were providing for.
So on the outdoor cats, we're talking about 8. How do we control colony size? Especially if we're talking about trap neuter release, we're not spaying female cats, is that correct? It's only neutering male cats. So if we have male cats that are traveling and can travel up to 2 miles.
We'll be doing both.
We do both.
Oh, you do both?
Yes.
Okay.
It's just
Okay.
referred to as neuter. It's
Okay,
both.
all right.
We try to simplify, the T.
Sure, no, I get it.
NSR.
I just want to make sure, because if cats are traveling, how do you control colony size, first of all? If a colony gets to 10, does the person that's licensed to take care of the colony, are they required to trap the extra 2 and bring them somewhere?
So to piggyback on the first question, once you have a colony that's already established and you TNR that colony, when one of the cats passes away, the colony, they don't go out and find a new friend to bring their colony. It just, eventually what will happen, the colony will just go away. So they're not going out and replacing one that has been deceased. So if we're trap, neutering, and releasing them, and they have 8 cats, and they start to die off at different periods for whatever reason, they don't regenerate another, they don't bring in another to the colony.
So any other cats that may travel, they're not accepted into the colony?
Cat behavior is a little strange. It's kind of like pick your friends. So
Yeah.
if a cat is in a colony and it wanders off, most of the time it stays with that colony. It's not going to leave that colony that's already established.
I can think of a bunch of different variances. I'm not going to get into it now. I mean, I'm thinking about indoor cats that run away, you know, and there's all sorts of things, I guess, that.
I will tell you, if you have an indoor cat and they're spay and neutered, most of the time they're microchipped. So if they do get away and they end up in the shelter, the chances of them being reunited with the owner, it is significantly greater.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. The other question I have is, I understand we're vaccinating the cats. I have to take my dog in every year to get its rabies shot. Are we going to trap these cats every year to keep vaccinating them, or is it they're vaccinated once and then they're good? How is that going to work?
So we do have, we've had 2 veterinarians on our board. We only have one that's still standing there. She did talk about the statistics and the probability of how long a rabies vaccination actually lasts. And so there are studies out there. So let's say that I take my animal in and I have it vaccinated, and the following year I'm like, you know, my dog's getting a little older or my cat's getting a little older. I don't really think that they can withstand that rabies vaccination again. So they test them and they can do a titer. So, and then they only give them, you know, what they absolutely have to have. So there are studies out there that rabies vaccinations last a lot longer than what we tell people. And a lot of times lifespan in a colony is much less than it is for an indoor house cat.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that begs some other questions for some other ordinances. I'll talk to Bob at another day.
I'm so sorry,
Date or
sir.
time.
I'm really sorry. Call me, we'll talk.
Not germane to this discussion, though, so thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem.
I have a follow-up question. So with the 8 per colony, like Councilmember Johnson said, there's colonies already that are larger than that. So what happens in the beginning? The enforcement.
That was quite frankly a question I was hoping we wouldn't ask today.
Yeah, I know.
That's, what we do right now is Friends of Feline works with those colonies when they run into them, and they try to find ways to spread those numbers out. But like Stephanie said, and this is only anecdotally, they took the cats, what she's not telling you is they took the cats from northeast Kansas and moved them to the far border of Kansas, and 3 of them made it back. It took them a year. So it's really hard to do that, but they do try to relocate those cats, and you know, sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not.
It's really a last-ditch effort to help bring them into compliance as well.
Right.
So that's what we'll try things like that, or
Correct.
we'll, okay.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have any idea the size of the community cat or the feral cat population? I mean, I know they don't self-report or anything.
They don't tell them themselves. I would like to, you know, we would like to know that, but just seeing the numbers, just with Friends of Felines, for example, that's already currently doing TNR and helping cat colony givers, I mean, they were at 1,000 last year. I mean, that's 1,000 feral cats, and they were at 900 the year before. So, I mean, we're about 3,500 cats in since 2015 alone. So being able to reduce that population would be
I'm just
a
trying to figure out the
success.
size of the magnitude here. I mean, how many we're talking?
I wish we knew. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really hard
It's
counting
impossible to-
cats.
How many registered do we have now?
Registered?
Well, the
0.
0, okay.
0.
But TNR's been going on since 2013, you said?
That's pretty much, they ramped up their program in 2015 that's when K-State came in and they started getting very aggressive. They were doing
So
it kind of on a smaller magnitude, but
Sure.
unfortunately, it's not in compliance with the current city ordinance.
So we're 5 or 6 years into a TNR program. Have we started seeing numbers? So how many years do you do a TNR program before you see a reduction in numbers?
So just for example, in 2015, we euthanized in the shelter 2,118 cats.
So
Last year, we only did 920.
So I get the number. You talk about reducing the population of feral cats in the community at some point. How many years before you see a reduction in the feral cat population?
There are really no studies out there that can tell you an exact time because each community is different, especially with how each program is run.
Mr. Mayor, one of the cities that we visited told us they saw a reduction in a year. I think that's unrealistic for Wichita. As the Vice Mayor has alluded to, we really don't know what the numbers are out there. We don't know how many colonies are yet to be addressed. What we have to have is money for the community partners that is going to make us a little bit more successful, maybe get more animals in that can go through this program, through the process. And to say we're going to see results in 2 or 3 years, I think is maybe a little bit optimistic. But we do expect in the long run we're going to see results. We just don't, if I knew for sure a year from today that we'd been able to double the number of cats that we put through TNR, I would tell you probably 3 to 4 years we're going to see the results. But I don't know if we're going to be able to ramp up and double the number of cats that we're doing right now. It may be triple the number of cats that we're doing, or it may be only be 10% more than the number of cats that the private partner is doing on their own right now. We just don't know what that number is going to be, and we don't know what the number of cats that we have out there right now. We just know that since they started ramping up their program and working more diligently with us, we've seen our euthanasia rate go down substantially.
But we haven't seen our feral cat population go down.
I don't know how to answer that question because I don't know how to quantify the feral cat numbers that we have out there. All I can look at is the number of cats that they're putting through their program and the number of cats that we euthanize. And to me, there's a direct correlation between the two. They've ramped up their numbers and our euthanasia rates have gone down. That's
so I get that, but you're making the claim that it will reduce the feral cat population.
We believe that to be true. I cannot.
I just would like to figure out how to quantify that.
I don't have the empirical data to prove it.
Okay.
It's just.
Who is the city that decided to adopt TNR and transport all of their cats out of their city?
It wasn't a city, it was a homeowner that partnered with HSUS here in the state of Kansas.
It was one person.
One person.
One family that didn't want the cats back.
And there were 50 of them?
15 was it?
Oh, 15.
I thought you said a city adopted TNR and then transported all their cats out.
No. A family contacted to an organization to help with the TNR program because they had too many cats.
Here we go. Send it to the Vice Mayor's ranch.
There you go.
Yes. I have one more question. So if our performance metric is going to be a decrease in euthanization, that's what we're saying, right? So what would be our goal?
For a euthanasia rate?
Uh-huh.
Well, if I had my way, it would probably be under 5%.
Okay.
If you understand the theory in animal services, basically a live release rate of anything that comes into your shelter that is 90% or higher is considered successful. Right now, we're probably about 94 to 95% of the dogs that come into our shelter are released live, back to owners or to our rescue partners. If we could do the same thing with cats, if we could release them live back to their environment, to their caregivers, to their homeowners if they're microchipped and we can track them back, anything above 90% we would consider successful. I would shoot for a little bit higher than that, but that would be what success would tell us.
Yeah, so you'd like to get it down from that 25% euthanized
Under 10.
down to
Correct.
5 or 10%?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Anything else?
No, this will go back to the DABs for comment before it comes back to you. And we'll take any feedback at that time.
Do we actually have the ordinance? It wasn't in the packet.
It was in the packets out front, so.
We did not get it.
Very
So we
sorry.
need the actual ordinance.
I will have it emailed to you before.
We will get that to you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a related but unrelated item. I do want to commend Captain Pinkston and Chief Ramsey and others that have been associated with animal control operation. That's a significant improvement in terms of the release rate for animals, for dogs, and that has not come overnight. It took a lot of hard work to get there, and I didn't want that to go without being noticed. The next item is an exciting pilot project that we were able to undertake because of Councilmember Glendenin's commitment of some of his Hyatt funds to a code enforcement, an intense code enforcement effort. So I'm going to have Chris Labrum talk a little bit about the program and then some lessons learned, not only for future pilots, but more importantly, just for our future enforcement efforts, period. So with that, Chris.
Ready, sir? All right, thank you, Manager Layton, mayors, council members, good morning, and thank you. I've got Kaylin Nethercott, our new neighborhood inspection administrator, with me as well, so she can definitely jump in to help us if we get into some in-depth in the stats, etc., if we need to do that. So as the manager said, last fall, the last quarter of last fall, based on the Hyatt proceeds funding, brought a focused area, determined a focused area in the city, so the 3.5 square mile area, and that is fairly concentrated. Our largest inspection area is 20 square miles, and that's one inspector. So this area alone is about half the size of any other normal area that's usually managed by a single inspector. In this case, we had 3, and again, the main kind of difference here, I shouldn't say the main, but in addition to 3 inspectors in that area, a proactive inspection type concept. So that included 1 temporary position for an inspector, and then also brought the code liaison into that a little more. So her main focus for that period of time was District 3, as well as, of course, that area. The $150,000 went to fund that position, as well as some materials and different things that we'll see as we go through this. So a quick depiction of the area there. You see the District 3 is the yellow. The project area is in green, bounded by Kellogg and Pawnee on north, south, east, west, I-35 to Oliver. The neighborhoods listed there were chosen by areas where we thought we could make an impact. These areas have active neighborhood associations or neighborhood members who have worked with us, who've obviously the council hears from, and there are also areas where we're battling decline, but not areas in severe decline. So a few points of this project included an educational outreach at the district and the neighborhood meetings. So we did have the team attend greatly higher than, and held higher than normal meetings to get the word out, ensure that everyone, for one, understood regulations and ordinances, and then also how to assist. Another tenet was a compliance agreement. So all of our uniform criminal complaints go through environmental court. So at a given time, one of our judges is designated to hold e-court, and so the environmental court is where, of course, all of our actions take place. So what this did is, with those resources, once someone was in a UCC type status, we met with them in an effort to kind of draw up a contract, and that went through to ensure they knew everything that had to take place for them to be in compliance. So versus showing up in e-court with 3 out of 4 violations completed and questions about the 4th one, etc., a little more of a focus, a lot of that through the code/court liaison, as well as the inspectors, to assist there with that level of voluntary compliance prior to having to show up in court. Another one was our advisory notice hang tags. These are door hangers that inspectors can put out, and we currently use those throughout the city. So that is not unique to the pilot project. Again, it just that focus allowed us to do a lot more of those. It doesn't really work, of course, to put out a lot of door hangers if we can't follow up. Those involve what those state is that an inspector was in your area, noticed violations, or noticed issues with your home, your yard, etc., that would normally be violations, and it gives you a compliance period where we follow up. Of course, that tends to be, it is something inspectors can use. That sometimes is a little problematic when we're responding to complaints, because those complaining want to see a violation, an actual violation given. So we have to kind of negotiate that a little in a different scenario. But in this area, the inspectors proactively would use those quite a bit.
The materials and the equipment that were purchased, some of that was some yard care equipment, things that we could loan to lawnmowers, rake, shovels, etc., that could be loaned to volunteer groups working with the code liaison to clean up properties. Some of that also is then used with dump vouchers or a situation where we may need a little bit larger equipment, consumables that volunteer groups use, etc. And then lastly, we enacted a process server contract. It took $30,000 to do that. We used 2 different process servers during the time that had a little bit different technique in the way they served, and we'll see a little bit later that we had quite a bit of success with that.
Chris, was the process server under the 150 or on top of the 150?
Within.
Within?
Yes, sir, within the
Thank you.
150. So a few of the results on cases and the actions that took place. So you see the total number of cases started there. We generally have between 9,500 and 10,000 cases a year across the entire city. So you do see that this brought a fairly large number of cases relative to the area. Of those housing cases, 304. So and a high percentage of those resolved. One thing we were very happy with is this helped us keep a lot of cases out of a housing case. We were able to take care of it prior to that. But again, those cases where the actual home is starting to decline and there's problems with it, we still, we were able to resolve 76% of those, which is pretty high in that amount of time. So nuisance cases, again, as you see there, very pleased to see that 90% case resolution during the time, and obviously a fairly high number of nuisance cases. Zoning cases, most of those would be parking violations and those type of issues. Again, a very high percentage of those were able to be solved, especially indicating that a lot of times that's education. People don't realize, or maybe they do realize, but they don't think anybody cares. Once they find out somebody else is worried about it, then they go ahead and comply. So the advisory notices, as discussed, did go ahead and issue 526 of those. We're able to get just shy of 400 to take care of it without a case for 76% compliance rate. So again, very encouraging and a tool that we will continue to utilize. Again, it just has to remain focused. If we blanket the city with all of those, then people realize there's no follow-up and it kind of loses its impact. So voluntary compliance in the project area compared to the rest of the city, and we did have a slight increase. We were up a few percentage points, I should say, in our overall voluntary compliance across the city last year, which was good. And then 12% above that in the compliance area. We knew it would be higher. We didn't expect it to be quite that much higher. So again, a lot of that is with the proactive enforcement. We're targeting some more minor violations, easier to correct. We think a lot of that also comes in from the involvement of the code liaison, as well as the inspectors being able to put more involvement and more attention to their individual cases and help people, again, know what they need to do to comply, kind of that reminder. What we do see in general in our nuisance cases is when we provide a violation, we'll get immediate contact. And they, what did I do? What does this mean? What is it? So there'll be some discussion within the first 24 to 36 hours of the violation being issued. And then they say, okay, thanks, I got it. And then the next time we have contact is when they get the reminder that their court date is a week or two out. So a lot of times there's a lapse or forgetting, if you will, between that time. So again, I think that increased just presence had a lot to do with that. Code liaison was very busy last year, so this represents a pretty high percentage of Suzanne's work. She actually had just under 600 customers last year in various ways. Of course, not all of those becoming a full-blown case, but specific ones that she handled in the project area. And then that's in addition, throughout the rest of the district was 57. So that did represent a high percentage there. Again, we were very happy to be able to have a lot of those resolved, and 19 of those rose to the level that, so this would be where a formal project group churches, organizations who have gotten on the list. They want to volunteer. They're bringing resources and people, maybe using some of our equipment and some of our resources to do a little bit more of a large-scale project. So that doesn't count where just some neighbors get together and help someone out. Abatements in that area, so we did not have a extremely high number there. So we did, so 25 total in that area. We did 730 abatements across the city in about that same time frame. So relatively a small percentage there. We did see that it helped. This does help us keep away from abatement type scenarios. And a little bit more about the process server. So we did see 140 UCCs served. We see them a few weeks, being served a few weeks earlier through the process server, and we're able to get to a few more of those. The main thing here is it just relieves a lot of burden from the warrant office. They have obviously an immense load that they're dealing with, and an environmental court warrant is, of course, a very low priority on their list. So a lot of what we see here is it's a great use of funds for a relatively small monetary amount. We can get a lot of impact and again remove that burden from them. So moving to the lessons learned, just as stated on the last slide, the use of a private process server is proven both effective and very cost efficient. So we had $30,000 budgeted, and let me point out as well that we have not used all of that yet. So our thanks to legal. They did a great job in helping us, Jennifer's folks, with drafting this contract so that though the pilot time was a quarter, the use of funding for equipment and for the process server was until gone, until utilized. So we did not have to stop all of that in December. That way, of course, we wanted to be able to follow through on a lot of the cases that we knew we would start through this project. So we still have them working those UCCs and serving those warrants. And we are estimating that starting out for about $40,000 a year of budget money, we could keep one or more process servers. So when we expand this, we probably have to have a few different contractors in order to get those taken care of. But for that amount, we could greatly accelerate that, the serving of those warrants, which greatly accelerates our caseload, which has the obvious impact of assisting us in many ways and in achieving compliance. So second to that, funding for the materials and the equipment has also greatly increased our capacity, especially for those volunteer groups. So maintaining the small amount of equipment that we do have is not a very large dollar figure. We can do that for easily less than $10,000 a year. And then what we do see is, especially with some of our larger abatement projects, we have to rent dumpsters. Sometimes we end up needing maybe a dump vehicle. We need some more, a little bit heavy equipment, something involved there. Everything from trash bags to gloves, the different things that we give to the volunteers. So we probably average about $1,000 in consumables for our projects that Suzanne handles. So
they can also do small repair projects, painting a house, repairing a roof on a shed. Those kinds of products would be from there as well.
And that is a very good point with the housing cases. So exactly, paint to minor carpentry type materials. Yeah, so yes, thank you. Thanks, Caitlin. That's perfect. Yes, again, and this is something obviously we would have to kind of, we're working that right now as we go through budget and different things to try to squeeze and find money that we can put in these areas. I also am trying to explore some grant type money here. As we talk about the Code Liaison program, I've actually moved the funding from that program away from grant funding. It is currently now under a revenue funded position. The reason I'm able to do that now is because we have one of our inspectors deployed with the military. So we're utilizing those unused personnel funds at the moment. So we have to solve that as we go through the budget. But moving that to being budget funded gives us a lot more options with that program. And then we're trying to explore using that grant money in other areas where we're not directly tied to staff and equipment, where we're tied to actions that take time and they take money to accomplish, such as areas of condemnations and things like that. And we'll see a little bit as we move forward to that the use of the code liaison. We would like to expand that a little bit to try to, again, help mitigate some of those other situations. But also one that obviously we had expected would be the case and we want to continue using is the use of the advisory notices. Very effective in minor violations, especially those who have no history, because again, a lot of times it's an education situation. So we do expect to continue and recommend that we continue citywide use of those. I think I've emphasized it several times, but I will again. We have to be selective. We can't, if we get too overzealous with those, they lose their impact. And then, of course, as we also expected, no surprise here, is that when we reassign inspectors to those, to a concentrated area such as this, it's not really a sustainable model. So as we stand now, if we don't add resources, so we can have a pretty immediate impact in those areas. While that's happening, we're of course not getting as much done, and our caseload is starting to grow, and time in a case is lengthening in other areas as the inspectors try to pick that up. But we still do see some interesting and some good impact from that. Now, at the end of this year, if we see when we see where we're at with these neighborhoods, we'll have a lot more information and data on how if that impact helped us not have further problems, if the neighbors in those areas kind of continued to pay it forward, if you will. But obviously in the short term and while we're there, we do see a very immediate impact. So we're going to try to temper that or utilize that for a very specific small area, very short time type concepts that we'll continue to explore and to use. So I think if we with even smaller areas and again, smaller time periods.
But Chris, in this pilot project, you say that we've taken from other areas. We added to the budget. We added $150,000 to the budget. So how did we still take from other areas?
So good point, Mr. Mayor. Just that, so we had one additional inspector and we pulled 2 inspectors out of what would be their normal area. So then we had to spread those areas across the remaining inspectors.
So where did the $150,000 go?
It paid the temporary inspector. It paid the printing costs of door hangers and the other educational materials that we had. It did buy the equipment that we do still have on hand and that we will continue to use. I don't have that list with me, but several lawn mowers, yard care equipment, paint supplies, some of the carpentry supplies that Kaylin spoke of for projects, a lot of dump vouchers for the cleanup projects we did, or dump vouchers that we gave to individuals for those.
Process server.
Process server, 30,000.
It also paid for 1 year of the code enforcement liaison, but that's not, no longer will that be paid from that fund. So, and I apologize, I inherited this. Those of you who remember Deb Legg, she sends regards. So I'm speaking on this from the back end and not the front. Thank you.
And on that note, obviously, Deb set this up, Ms. Legg set this up, and so this was not from really a perspective of, gee, I wonder what will happen here. She had obviously some very solid hypothesis type items as she went into this. A lot of experience, a lot of years of experience from her and the other inspectors to kind of test and see what would happen and what we could do with that. Does that answer your question, Mr. Mayor?
Sort of. I mean, you would have had an inspector working that area regardless, so you can't say you dedicated 2 inspectors to that area. You had an additional inspector with
3 inspectors.
With 150,000.
There were 3 inspectors total. Approximately 50,000 went to 1 inspector. Another 50 grand went to the code enforcement liaison. And then the last 50,000 went toward the equipment, the printing, the door hangers. I mean, if you need an itemized breakdown, the process server.
All right.
Process server was 30,000 of that amount.
All right.
Thank you, sir. So a few things here. Again, those as far as lessons learned recommendations are the ones we're working with right now as we go forward, implementing those in areas as we speak, as well as working that into this year's budget and those discussions. So future considerations as we go forward is we do see a very positive impact, a lot of gain from our Code Liaison program. And I know this is something some of you have heard me speak to several times during orientations and different things, is that I would really like to expand that program and look at a way to increase those positions depending on how we can shift resources and what we can do. Ideally, in my world, I would love to have Suzanne with her expertise there as the overall liaison, with then a code liaison assigned to each side, to both the east and the west side, which would be Harlan Bascom and Brandy Wallace's areas, the two supervisors there. In order to manage that, obviously, in order to budget for that, we would have to do something different with the inspectors we have now. That would be a fairly large shift. So that's why I say future considerations. We're going to keep trying to come up with ideas and things we could potentially do to make that work. And of course, we see that would allow an expansion of the roles as well as the coverage, and help us to increase the amount of volunteerism at any given time. Suzanne's got 80 plus people on her list willing to volunteer. She's also got 80 to 100 people on her list needing assistance. We obviously have to play by the rules within that and get the right resources to the right people. And so she is very busy, and our ability to match that up is really just limited by our bandwidth right now. So I think if we added a few more, we could do that. So what we also see among the other things that I've kind of hit on already with the liaison is ability to get more involved and earlier in the processes to keep properties and keep property owners out of more advanced decline. So there are grant programs, for example, that are available for people to get some help in fixing up their home. But generally you have to be current with your taxes in order to be eligible for those. So we do see there are a lot of situations where if we can get in early and have the time and the resources to work with the folks, ensure they have proper education and some available resources early on, we would like to obviously keep homes out of a condemnation or a pre-condemnation type scenario as one example there. And then, so lastly, as far as our considerations would be to look towards a potential increase in proactive enforcement, more so than just the compliance that we do, or complaint-based that we do currently. We would obviously have a blend of that. We wouldn't completely go away from complaint-based. And this, there would be some subtleties in that shift. So we don't lack for data. We have oodles of data and all kinds of theories and different things that we think that tells us and what we can do with that. Currently, though, we are very situational based. So again, we have a complaint, we have a problem. Maybe we have a problem owner, we have with multiple properties, or we have a problem property. And we'll get the team together, we'll get the police, the manager's office, the legal, ourselves, even Public Works at times, depending on what's happening, but we'll get the right players all in the room. I know I missed somebody in that, but council members, representatives is one of this. So we'll get in there and we'll come up with a really good plan, and we'll see a good impact in that. So there are some solutions out there. There's specific software that is marketed to departments such as ours that takes a lot of the police analysis, the police crime data, fire data. It takes the appraiser's office tax data. It takes all of our neighborhood enforcement data, a lot of our building department data, and puts calculates all of that, and allows you to look at different trends and relationships, ratios, etc. So when we talk about potential solutions there with software, potential cross-departmental actions, this would even be possibly more so outside of our department. It would be more so of the manager's office and the police department, others who have access to that data, and we get all together and they say, look, we think we've got X happening in this part of the city. If we could have MABCD go in with a proactive enforcement approach and target a specific type of violations, some different things like that would allow us to do that and then see that impact and try to take that from there. So that would be that very focused impact. And again, the kind of the limited scope examples are the ones I spoke to earlier, where we've seen a lot of really good success when we've done that. But again, we've done that more so reactively than proactively. So that would kind of be the big difference there. So with that, I'll gladly stand for questions, and we will continue to work forward with the process. And
if I might, it was interesting to see the impact on the area that was being focused on. Not only did I think some of the inspectors I talked to felt like they were actually making headway and actually making a positive impact instead of spinning their wheels and moving backwards. The neighborhood saw it too, and they saw the quality of life in their places they lived increase because of just adding a few extra resources to this area. Obviously, you know, we took a couple of inspectors from a couple of other areas, which I think we needed to do to show what you could do with a few more resources in one area. It made a big impact. It made a huge impact, and I think some of the numbers even show that. It was way more successful than I thought it would be. I didn't think it would be near that successful. And just by simply putting a door hanger on somebody and educating somebody that, hey, this is an issue, without writing a ticket, without writing anything that looked like it was mean, you know, being a little bit more nice and soft in your approach and educating the public, you get 76% compliance. And I thought that was probably the biggest takeaway I had from this.
I would love to see the numbers a year from now to see if it reduces the caseload and if it has longer lasting impact to the community. I agree that it cleans up the problem. I hope it's not just a temporary cleanup. I hope that
we're not even temporarily cleaning up right now with our current resources. We're not even getting to that point.
But I'm talking about on this pilot project,
sure.
The changes it made, I hope that it has lasting impact.
I think what you're going to see in my experience is because some of these areas are very high or low in owner occupancy, you see a lot of turnover of people in the neighborhoods. I think you're going to see re-education need to happen in the neighborhoods because we don't have high owner occupancy in these areas. Although the areas that they picked had some of the higher owner occupancy in Southeast Wichita. So it will be interesting to see based on what we've seen now.
If I can jump in, Mayor, because I think that sustainability is the important issue there. And I think if we're going to do proactive efforts like this in the future, the key is to do it in partnership with a neighborhood association or just a neighborhood group who's willing to take ownership of it and to then continue to help us when we have to pull out some of the inspectors so that they continue to report violations, and then we will commit to being aggressive in addressing those. Otherwise, you're just going back to the same situation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the goal is that you can pull back some of the inspectors because they don't have as many problems to inspect.
Right. At least in the short term. Right.
And the hope is, though, as we're talking about using neighborhood associations, it's my thought, and from what I've seen, that you want to be careful not to make the neighborhood association the enemy of its neighbors as well. So that has to be more of a gentle educational component, I think, through the neighborhood association, other than just neighbors turning in neighbors and being combative. I think that then you end up with other types of enforcement issues in neighborhoods that you don't want to have to deal with.
Other comments, questions? All right, thank you.
Our last item has to do with optimization plan that was endorsed by the council previously. You had asked for periodic reports to see how we were doing on our targets, and so this is your first periodic report. Turn over to Alan King to walk you through.
How much time do you need for this?
We'll be done in 15 minutes.
10.
Or less, 10.
It took me long enough 5 minutes to read.
So a while back, around 2015, it became evident that we had a backlog of work, deferred maintenance that we had to address in our water and our sewer systems. And so we attempted to identify and quantify that backlog and to develop a strategy to address it. Council did some things like increasing the amount of water and sewer main replacements and other sorts of actions that helped us take care of the infrastructure that we had and improve it. One of the things we need to do, though, is look at the way that we were maintaining our infrastructure and looking at what the costs associated with that to optimize how we're spending our money. We have to, if we're going to try to catch up on some of this deferred maintenance, and in addition to that, anticipating some rather large capital improvement projects like the water treatment plant and the sewer treatment plant, we wanted to make sure that we were getting the best use of the funds to reduce or mitigate the amount of rate increases that we had. So to that end, we came up with a utilities optimization study that we performed, and it identified some areas of optimization: operations and maintenance optimization, capital improvement optimization, and financial optimization. So we struck out on the first of those, called it Phase 1, Utilities, Operations, and Maintenance Optimization, with the idea that we're going to try to achieve a $6.5 million savings every year on our operations and maintenance of the utility, and instead redirect those funds towards capital investments. And so this is a necessary building block for us to pursue capital optimization and financial optimization. So we put together a team, and that team has been working on it, and I'd like to have Ben Nelson, the senior project manager on this project, come up and report not only what we're doing, but what we intend to do. Ben?
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, everybody. We'll give the condensed version. If you see something up here you want some specific information about, please let me know. We'll break this into two pieces of the presentation. The first half will be a status of our optimization efforts, our savings to date, and some of what we're pursuing in the future. And then the second half will be a proposal for fee revisions as part of a revenue identification effort to make sure that highly individualized services, we have user fees for those, that we get full cost recovery on them. So we have a business plan that has 25 deliverables that are segmented into either firm savings strategies, modeled savings strategies, or items with the new water plant. Firm savings strategies are items that get us hard cost savings like chemical and energy reductions, new revenue outside of the rate structure, overtime reductions, those things. Modeled savings really are a little more esoteric, but basically it's developing a much better preventative and plant maintenance program than what we've had in the past. There's a ripple effect into extending asset life by up to 25%, which means long-term we can reduce our replacement costs by the target that was set from the first phase of this program was about 3.5% modeled savings and $3 million of firm savings. So over the next year or so, what we're focusing on the firm savings side are chemical and energy reductions as well as new revenue opportunities. On the modeled savings side, you see something called CMMS, that's computerized maintenance management system. That's getting a work order system optimized and deployed. It's been very hit or miss the last 10, 20, 30 years in terms of how we issue work orders, and we think we can streamline and improve preventive maintenance that way, as well as the development of maintenance checklists and standard operating procedures. Talked a lot about the water plant the last several months, so I won't touch on that too much, but work is underway with the design build firm and also on the WIFI and SRF applications. Firm savings, we've have 4 strategies either identified or implemented. In total, these are about $1.9 million through the 6 months of the program of the total $3 million target. So we're about 2/3 of the way there. 2 notable things that are in progress. One is we're in discussions with Westar on a renewable energy rate that would lock in a lower rate than what we pay today for electric service, and it would lock it in for 20 years. We think that could save about $145,000 a year. Once we get through those negotiations or discussions, that's when we'd be ready to bring it to Alan and Bob for consideration prior to council consideration. And the other big chunk that you see is user fee revisions. That's what we'll spend the last half of the discussion on. For modeled savings, we have we are in the middle of optimizing a work order system. It's in place now in 3 of the 4 utility operating divisions, scheduled to put it into the 4th operating division in a couple of months. We've identified 7,000 new preventative maintenance tasks, so we've increased our preventative maintenance scheduling by 73% from what we had prior to the program. That's still ongoing as well. We have some work to finish up at some of our pump stations. And we're deploying 131 tablets to field staff so that they have a screenshot of what you see here, a work order system where it has individual work orders, asset IDs, tasks, like 8 different tasks, for example, to do the same preventative maintenance. So we've got streamlined and standardized preventative maintenance being done by people in a way that they're not having to go to part suppliers 2 and 3 times in the middle of a preventative maintenance task, and really try to make sure that they're spending as much time as they can on preventative maintenance. That's what was the finding from the first phase of this, is that we can increase our asset life by up to 25% if we increase the amount of time we're putting into preventative maintenance and into the amount of planned maintenance we have. It's somewhat nuanced, but in a way it's not. We all have vehicles and homes and stuff. The more you're in line with what manufacturers recommend in terms of keeping your systems operating well, the longer it goes, and that's basically what we're doing on a utility-wide basis. We're going to be reporting this regularly to the city manager through a dashboard of key performance indicators and firm and modeled savings calculations. We went through a validation audit of Wichita State University. They verified the firm savings numbers that we had, asked for a couple of fairly minor changes to how we were calculating modeled savings. We made those adjustments, so we're in line with what our WSU partners have expressed through an external validation, so we feel comfortable going forward. We're going to be reporting accurate information. There's also a lot of key performance indicators. We have 48 data points on our maintenance program. We're tracking energy and chemical costs at 17 different water and wastewater sites, as well as cost recovery on 100 different fees that we charge. To sum up the first half of the presentation, the optimization program, we're making some progress on firm and modeled savings in the first 6 months of the program. Right now we're on the energy, and going forward on the energy side, we're looking at putting in an energy management information system to help us better account for how we're spending money on energy, and also provide some normalization of weather patterns and seasonality of our electric usage. We're going to be issuing an RFP likely in the next couple of months to have an energy contractor do what are called ASHRI Level 3 audits, investment grade audits, on our energy usage at key water and wastewater facilities. On the chemical side, we're working with Burns & McDonnell and their process engineering team right now on finding chemical efficiencies, and we're going to wrap all of those up into decision packages for presentation either at the end of this year or early next year. Transition to the back half of this, the fee revisions. It's been a priority, I believe, of council in the last couple of budgets. When there are highly individualized services, that we ought to get full cost recovery on those. We have 107 different fees that are representative of those highly individualized services that we charge through the utilities. In a lot of cases, we haven't adjusted those in 10, 20, or I think 25 years is the longest that I saw. So, and maybe more, because some of them, we don't know when they actually went into effect. So we did a cost recovery analysis, looked at the last 3 to 5 years of history, either in project costs, labor costs, equipment costs, and so forth, to try to cost out what we as a utility are paying for each of these 107 services, and or 107 individualized services provided through those fees, and then find out what revenue we're getting. And what we found is that it costs the utility about $8 million a year to provide these highly individualized services. We're only getting about $6.4 million today, so that's leaving $1.6 million that effectively is being paid by ratepayers at large. Because we haven't adjusted these fees in so long. So what we're proposing is a much more programmatic approach to fee revisions on the rate side of it, which is the lion's share of our revenue. Every year we come to you all with 10-year financial projections, 20-year financial projections actually in January, the most recent rate change. And we go through that every year with you all, and you make and consider adjustments to that. On the fee side, we haven't done anything nearly as scheduled or programmed. So what we'd like to do is move towards a programmatic review of fees as well, to make sure we get to and maintain full cost cost recovery on those. So we've highlighted a number of different cost drivers on some of the major fee changes. They're up here to save time. I won't go through a lot of those, but basically what we're looking for is the amount of time it takes our technicians and people to process work orders and to shut off water and do all those kinds of things, the equipment that's involved, fleet, fuel, all of those kinds of things. But we did put one example that I'll walk through real briefly to show you hopefully the rigor of what we've gone through on the analyses of each of those 107 fees. This is an example of an account origination fee. This is for anybody who either establishes new water and wastewater service with us or is transferring service. And we'll walk through this to show this is the kind of calculation methodology we use for all 107 fees. So account origination, when somebody calls into the call center, they talk to an operator, the operator puts information into the billing system, they issue a work order and they do all of that work. That takes about 15 minutes. We then have a water line technician that goes out to the property. They have to record what the meter's reading is at that point in time so that the new customer starts with a baseline of 0 and gets billed only for what they use going forward. And then they have to unlock a meter. That takes 30 minutes. And then there's 30 minutes worth of the amortized maintenance, repair, and replacement cost of the vehicle over a year's life of, or the life of the vehicle. 30 minutes, that vehicle costs that amount. Then we also have, in this case, a subscription service to something called utility exchange, which validates customer information in the event that they don't pay their bill. This helps us have the information we need to be successful in collections. So we total all that up, it equals $31. For ease of implementation and understanding, we're recommending a $30 fee. So we went through this analysis on 107 fees. Since the beginning of February, we reached out to a number of different stakeholders, and I'll summarize 3 groups in particular that are affected by 3 different types of fees. The first is that we have some fees associated with new development that's primarily borne by contractors that MABCD works with and the Wichita Area Builders Association, WABA. It's based on project history. Those hadn't changed since 2005 and 2008. We shared those proposed fees with WABA and with MABCD contractor, who they have on their list. We heard back from WABA about a week and a half ago. They had shared it with their development committee and their codes committee and notified us that they are not in opposition to the fee increases that we have on the development type fees. So we're comfortable moving ahead with those. We also have a group of 56 industrial permitted facilities. They have heavy strength wastewater that ends up in the system, requires a pre-treatment program from us. We notified them of the proposed changes and asked for feedback. What we heard from them is that they're not in opposition to the fee increases, but they want them in effect January 1st, so they have a chance to plan for it in their corporate budgets. That's not going to be a problem, I don't think, on our end. And then the third set of fees and feedback I would like to highlight is we have 2 types of grease fees for food-producing facilities that have fats, oils, and greases that end up in the wastewater collection system. It causes extra clean-outs and inspections and whatnot. So it's a lot higher in terms of the waste that ends up in the wastewater collection system. We've worked with the Kansas Restaurant and Hospitality Association, notified the 1,400 facilities that are affected, and those discussions are still ongoing. They say that because those fees haven't changed since 1994, that the proposed increase is too much to absorb at once, and they'd like it to have it phased over 3 or 4 years. The second piece of feedback we've gotten is that they feel the current fee structure is not equitable because it treats a church that has breakfast once a week to the same as a fast food restaurant that's producing food 24 hours a day. So they would like to see more of a low grease producer and a high grease producer. And so we're continuing those discussions right now. So what we'd be recommending as final takeaways on the fee revisions is to come back to you, put something on the agenda in April, moving ahead and enacting all of the fee increases other than those 2 grease fees. We would do the grease fees at some point down the road after public outreach is finished, but all the other ones would go for consideration in April. They would be in effect July 1st with the exception of those wastewater permit fees. In line with the outreach and feedback we heard, those would be in effect January 1st so they can plan for them in their budgets. So that wraps up the fee revision piece and hopefully the optimization program going forward.
So I would like to see all, you said 107?
Yes.
I'd like to see all 107 and the proposals and disseminate that to the council and then
and how much each one represents in the total picture.
Right.
We'll make sure that's included in the packet. We have it available, so we'll have that in there as well. And as well as an explanation, not just the dollar change, but what the fee is, because a lot of them, you'll want to see what they are, because
When the last, I mean, if drill down even as to when that was last changed.
Right.
Okay.
Because you said one, it's 1994?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good
And
distance.
I agree with the complaints that we're hearing, that we should have a more equitable solution based on the operations.
If you can, yeah.
Ben, thanks for this information. This, the proposed fee on the 107
Yes.
activities, is that full cost recovery?
That's full cost recovery, yes.
Okay, all right. And then, because of what happened with the grease fee, do we expect unhappy customers for these other 105?
Generally, no. I mean, a lot of them are for if you don't pay your bill and you get your water shut off.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing as a business
Sure.
planning their budget, knowing they're going to have to pay these 2 grease fees or one of these grease fees, depending on whether they have an interceptor or not. It's not the same. They're not, I'm going to get shut off twice a year and we're going to budget $13 instead of $30. A lot of them are more in line with that. So really, that's why our
Okay.
outreach focused on the development fees, the grease fees, and the pretreatment fees, because those are more of the ones where people are planning for those kinds of things, and they're not one-off kinds of. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Anything else? All right.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Ben.
Great work.
So it looks like we need about 30 minutes for the executive session. I think we can do that on the second floor, there in the cafeteria room. Yes,
I have a
no?
12:30.
So I get that. You can
You
leave
think we
from
can be
there
done?
just as
Okay.
well as you can leave from.
I can, if we can get up there quickly.
Right. So I would move that we go into executive session.
Second?
Well, let me explain it. Oh, I'm sorry. For 30, actually, there's 2 sessions, 3 sessions. There's a NIC settlement, there's, now, do I need to state all 3?
They can be combined into 2 motions. One is acquisition of property, which is 1 session. The other session is 2 settlement negotiation discussions.
Okay, so the 3 sessions technically will be combined, but 1 motion for the acquisition of property. The executive session is required to protect the city's right to confidentiality of its negotiation position and the public interest. And then the other 2 we will combine. They're for legal consultation with city attorney, which is deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship. And they are required to protect the attorney-client privilege and public interest, and that we will return back into these chambers no earlier than 12:30.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we'll convene into executive session. We don't have a lot of time.